You are watching and listening to Electronic Intifada. I am Jon Elmer. This is the Resistance Report for day 699 of Israel's genocidal war on Gaza. I am reporting this on the 4th of September. Let's begin with the maps. As always, I will be breaking down the Beit Hanoun ambush coming up. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 released footage from the ground of that operation that I had reported on in early July, and we had only had thermal imaging camera footage of that from the Israelis. So stay tuned for that. But let's first understand the context of the battle as it stands right now. And these are the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs maps that I've been using for the last few months. You can see 86.5% is a shoot-to-kill zone in Gaza. And this is going to be an issue as the evacuation from Gaza City, the million people that live in Gaza City, some portion of them are expected to leave Gaza City. A significant portion are expected to remain in Gaza City, but they're being driven out of Gaza City and told to go to areas in the south. But as you can see from this map very clearly, the areas are already full. The white areas on the bottom, towards the bottom of the map, is Al-Mawasi. That is the tent camp that's lined up on the sand dunes. It has no infrastructure, and there's hundreds of thousands of people there. Deir al-Balah has been packed throughout the war. There's not room for people in Deir al-Balah, and so the Israeli military hasn't formally issued the evacuation order for Gaza City, but the preliminary maps show that the Israeli military expects people to go to areas in the south that are covered by those shoot-to-kill zones, that are in those areas that you can see that are under shoot-to-kill, which is separate, as I keep saying, and I want to make sure that everyone is very clear on this. That purple is not area controlled by the Israeli military. We know that. We know that in Khan Yunis, there's a number of pockets in Khan Yunis that the Israelis never took over, particularly in eastern Khan Yunis. But we do know that Rafah is that way. You can see at the bottom of the map, and that map shows the corridor, the Moreg corridor there. But yeah, just to say, these are not areas that Israel controls. These are areas where they shoot to kill anything that moves in that area from a distance, firing at them with heavy machine guns, with tank fire, and that's where the aid massacres exist as well, in those shoot-to-kill zones. So this week, the Israelis have begun the call-up of their reserves. The first reserves began earlier this week. The number is supposed to end up around 60 to 80,000, although the Israelis are being really slippery with these numbers because they know a lot of people, a lot of reserves are not going to report at this point. And the Israeli military has had to redeploy. They're going to deploy the reservists that are called up into the West Bank, into the on the northern border with Lebanon, on the eastern border with Jordan, and they're going to send the standing army, who are in those places I just mentioned, into Gaza. So the conscription army goes into Gaza. The reservists stay out as much as possible because it is a very unpopular war at this point in Israel. The genocide is not unpopular, is nearly universal support for the genocide in Gaza. But the Israelis don't want to fight in this war, and that goes all the way to the top of their leadership. The active chiefs of the Mossad, which is the external security, Shabak, internal security, Amman is military intelligence. Those chiefs and others are all, including the IDF chief of staff, are against the Gaza City invasion. They believe that the 60-day ceasefire that Hamas had on the table for the past month, which was Netanyahu's proposal a month ago, and then he pulled it back off the table, playing games because he wants the war to continue. Netanyahu believes if the war ends, that he will be elected out of office and will go to jail for his corruption charges. So there's still a lot to be determined about the exact way the forces are going to be used in Gaza. The resistance has been able to prepare for this battle for more than a year because the first battle of Gaza City ended in early 2024. There was a poll in Mariv newspaper this week that sort of underscored all this, that only 25% of Israelis, Jewish Israelis polled, believe that Israel is winning the war. About 20% believe that 𝐓𝐡𝐞 is winning the war. So we know how this is going. The defense minister said that Gaza City will become like Rafah and Beit Hanoun. Both areas have been virtually wiped out. And so this genocidal intent by the Israelis is consistent now for 699 days. And also because of the lack of the military's lack of interest in fighting this battle, they have a draft dodgers issue. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜 reported this week that the army and the police will be reinforced not only at Ben Gurion Airport, but also near maritime and land border crossings, looking for draft dodgers who are trying to flee the country. So something to take note of there. So the next map you could see, this is the Israeli version of the map, which you can see is completely different than that the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs map. Still, this is too generous to the Israeli military. They do not control large pockets of Khan Yunis, including the camp and the downtown of Khan Yunis are not controlled by the Israelis. There's pockets towards the east, Abasan al-Kabira, that they do not control. Those were where we saw the bulk of the operations that made June and July the deadliest months for the Israelis in the past year. So this map was posted. You could see the two Hebrew written terms there are the corridors. The bottom one is the Morag corridor, which I broke down on a previous show, and the Magan Os corridor is the one that cuts Khan Yunis there from the eastern to the western. Khan Yunis is split in half, and we know they don't control that corridor because on the show, on our last show 2 weeks ago, I told you about an operation, a 20-strong 𝐓𝐡𝐞 commando raid, breaching operation, tunnel-borne breaching operation against the Israeli position in the Magan Oz corridor. So they don't control that. But when they published this map, they bragged about 10,000 airstrikes during Gideon's Chariots Part 1. And the Gaza Health Ministry said more than 10,000 people were killed during that time. Israel's trying to say that they have 75% control over the Gaza Strip, but they don't. Those dotted lines that you see, those are buffer zones. And those are the buffer zones that Israel is trying to make permanent. But the resistance has attacked them in those buffer zones. And we're going to see later on in the show, the attack in Beit Hanoun is in that buffer zone where you see that dotted line on the far right side of the map on the eastern edge. So the bottom right corner of that map, that's Beit Hanoun. And that area was the staging area for this pretty remarkable ambush of Israeli troops. Army radio reported yesterday that the IDF admits yesterday morning that after nearly 2 years of war, there is, quote, enormous wear and tear on manpower and equipment. The IDF will enter Operation Gideon's Chariots B with only 60 to 70% readiness of the heavy bulldozers for the engineering missions. During the war, dozens of heavy bulldozers were damaged by anti-tank missiles and charges and were completely taken out of service. This is actually the first time we've even had dozens be mentioned. It's obviously way higher than dozens, but this is information that is covered by the Israeli military censor. We don't hear how many tanks, bulldozers, armored personnel carriers are taken out of service. So this was the closest we have gotten, and they say 60 to 70% readiness. So they're suggesting that somewhere around 40% of their armored bulldozers have been taken out of the battle, which is consistent with 699 days of resistance reports where we cover that extensively. This next slide is This was another leak. This is a leak by Channel 12, but this was an IDF leak. This is a booklet of lessons learned from Gideon's Chariots, Part 1, Part A. They haven't clarified if it's A or 1. B or 2, but we'll see in the coming days, distributed this booklet to all ground forces, and it was given to every training officer in the Israeli military. Every ground force maneuvering division was given this report, and it says, what you see on the screen there says, Gideon's Chariots failed. It didn't defeat Qassam or the Hamas government. It didn't free captives. Quote, made every mistake possible, gave the enemy resources. They fought a war of attrition without parameters or a timeline. They poorly handled Qassam's guerrilla warfare. But yeah, I think the takeaway point is every possible mistake was made in this battle that the IDF themselves admit they lost. And Haaretz pointed out that among the other shortcomings cited was that troops redeployed to areas where they had previously operated, and IDF combat methods had proved ill-suited to counter Hamas's guerrilla tactics. Now, this is something I've been pointing out on the show since day one. They arrived at the areas that they thought that they had previously taken operational control over, and they thought no one would be there. But as we know, the territorial battalions remain in those areas. So when the Israelis went back into eastern Khan Yunis to Abasan al-Kabira, they were immediately hit by the Abasan al-Kabira battalion of the Qassam brigades. And those surprises come from a fundamental misunderstanding of the Israeli military, of the way that the Palestinians fight and the way that they're organized. And I think that that was a remarkable note to pull out of this leaked document. Again, another leaked document. We went 630 days without a leaked document or video. And then in the past 2 months, we get leaks multiple times a week. So it's been interesting to see that internal fight within the Israeli military and political echelon, giving us access to these documents that we previously wouldn't see. So the next slide, let's move to the northern Gaza, because that's where the focus of this show is, and the war is right now. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 neighborhood, you can see that in the southeast of Gaza City, the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 neighborhood and Tufa. Both of those areas to the east of Gaza City were part of Gideon's Chariots 1, and they have massive destruction, near total elimination of eastern 𝐓𝐡𝐞 and Tufa as well. Beit Hanoun virtually wiped off the map, looks like a moonscape. Really, we're talking like post-apocalyptic looking areas in the north of Gaza, all over Gaza, but the north of Gaza in particular. Civil Defense reported the other day that in an 18-day span, 1,000 buildings were destroyed in the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 neighborhood and the neighboring neighborhood of Al-Sabra, which is just to the north of 𝐓𝐡𝐞, essentially the same neighborhood, connected to the same neighborhood. And we saw in 𝐓𝐡𝐞, as soon as the Israelis went in, we saw that multi-stage ambush by the Nukba elite special forces of the Qassam brigades that I broke down last show. So they were ready for them in 𝐓𝐡𝐞. And also earlier this week, the Army radio reported and the IDF reported that 7 IDF fighters were injured overnight in a armored personnel carrier that was hit by a IED. So again, just proof that these Qassam operations and munitions are continually penetrating these vehicles. They're inside the cabin, and 7 soldiers were wounded. Sounds like they got lucky. 7 soldiers wounded when a blast penetrates inside the cabin. Can be far more costly than that, as we know, throughout the war. The war began on the second day of the war. Qassam, with a Yasin 105, penetrated the back of an armored troop carrier and killed everybody on board. And it's happened a number of times throughout the war. Let's take a look at number 5, because you can see what's happened to 𝐓𝐡𝐞 here. These are satellite images that cover these two. So August is 8th is what you're seeing right now. For people listening, we look at a map here that looks, there's a lot of damage, but it looks like a city. You can make out a city in this August 8th satellite image from the New York Times, from Planet, from the satellite. And then if we flip it to August 25th, it looks like somebody took a massive eraser to it. It's just ashen gray, and totally destroyed for, like, what is that, 4 or 6 city blocks in a row, just completely wiped out in that period of time, 17 days. So you can see the destruction that's happening. They're not willing to fight the resistance. They want to draft dodge. They want to flee the country, but they have no problem executing this genocide. As Nora always points out in the newscast, if you didn't catch that today, you should go back and listen to her newscast covering the humanitarian impacts of this war. Okay, let's take a look at number 6B here. We have a 𝐓𝐴 𝐄𝐥𝐿 joint operation, a good look of tunnel and tunnel formation. You can see the fold in the wall, those turns. Those are what makes the tunnels effective. They're not just straight lines. They're not like a subway line. And here on the wall, you see, you see them there. That's an 𝐴𝐴𝐻 wheeled armored personnel carrier coming down the hill. They're going to show you a tank on the left there and the 𝐴𝐴𝐻 on the right of the screen. And they're going to fire a Kornet anti-tank guided missile system at this 𝐴𝐴𝐻 armored vehicle. There's a poem on the wall on the side I just want to point out. It is a poem from a 12th century Iraqi poet that talks about the nature of keeping prisoners. And it says, when we held power, mercy was our way. When you held power, blood spilled. You deemed it permissible for prisoners to be killed, while we showed mercy again and again. Let this mark the divide between us. That's what 𝐓𝐴 𝐄𝐿 has put up on the wall, handwritten poem from the 12th century, to point out at this moment in time, as Palestinian prisoners are being killed in captivity, and while Israeli prisoners in Gaza are big in the news in Israel, that they put those little notices. And we've seen this all throughout the war, where the individual units will put those kind of little marks. We've seen 𝐄𝐿 reading books at various stages that are meant to be significant. We've seen graffiti on the walls of the shot, where the fighters give their chance to speak to the world, and every time they do it, invariably, it's eloquent. It's usually deeply rooted in history and in Palestinian struggle, and it's topical. It's about what's happening at the moment today. So that poem about prisoners is a very salient message at this moment in time. So that is the strike on the 𝐴𝐴𝐻, and it believes that they've hit the 𝐴𝐴𝐻. That's what's burning there, and that's the medevac helicopter. We couldn't get any closer look at that 𝐴𝐴𝐻. When the war started, I told you that they were going to use these 𝐴𝐴𝐻s. I expected they would be used much more than they have been used. We saw them in Rafah during the Battle of Rafah, and we've seen them in the buffer zones. We've seen them be hit by Kornets a couple of times in the buffer zone areas, but they haven't been deep into Palestinian territory in those 𝐴𝐴𝐻 armored vehicles. They are wheeled vehicles that made their debut on the battlefield on October 7th. They rushed them into service. But it's interesting because they must believe that the Shuhada and the Yasin are damaging to those vehicles. That's the only supposition about why they're not using them more in Gaza. So a direct hit. So let's take a look here at number 7. Number 7. This is an elementary girls' school in southern Gaza City. You can see the Israelis are using it as a position. 𝐓𝐴 𝐄𝐿's pointing that out. You can see the dust because that's a tank driving in there. You can see the Merkava there in the bottom left. For people who are listening, you're looking at a school building surrounded by destruction, which is all around it. There's a D9 armored bulldozer driving by. So you can clearly see that it's a position within the school. 𝐓𝐴 𝐄𝐿's artillery teams here using 60 millimeter mortars that 𝐓𝐿 and Saraya build in Gaza. They also capture these, and they've also smuggled these, but they also build them. And we're going to watch this artillery unit land artillery inside the school enclosure where we see the tanks operating here. So I show you this one because we can see where the mortars land, and again, right inside the base. So perfect aim with that. And the Saraya fighter says, "We deliver a clear message that must be said from the heart of the battlefield to the enemy who continues to threaten and launch new operations. You have named this latest one Gideon's Chariots 2. We remind you that of the defeat that you suffered in Gideon's Chariots 1 will be the same again, only greater, God willing. You launched an operation called Gideon's Chariots 2, and we begin, by God, to repel it." So they are ready for Gideon's Chariots 2, and they're obviously always very on top of the moment of the news. And we see them sometimes, these fighters, they put the date that the operation took place, they send a message to a martyr, and they're always very up to date on the information. So these fighters in their positions are well connected to what's going on. In military terms, that's called command and control. It's what the Israelis did not have on October 7th, and the reason for the collapse of their forces on October 7th. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 dismantled their command and control. So yes, this is, you'll see here, watch the rounds land. Most of these mortar videos, we don't see where they land, but here is a perfect shot multiple times right inside the campus. So these are direct hits, and if a mortar is a direct hit, it's a fragmentation, an area weapon. So it sprays the whole area. So that's this is an elementary girls' school. Let's look at the next slide, number 8 here. You can see, so this started circulating about 6 days later on social media. This circulated, and BBC verified it. They verified that this is an army base. That was what BBC verified, put their mind to. It's pretty obviously a military base. I don't think anybody would say it's anything but. If you're listening to this, there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. There's 2 dozen armored vehicles, and in the top there's another half dozen engineering vehicles, and they're using the school as a military base. We've seen this all through the war. Schools, hospitals be used as military bases. And then yesterday, if we go to slide number 9, we've also seen them do this throughout the war. They left the base and they destroyed it. They blew it up. They blew up the school. The elementary girls' school is now virtually vaporized by wiring it on the ground with explosives, and they just wipe it out. So that's the genocide part of this military battle, and they do it with glee, with TikTok videos. But yeah, devastating a school. So number 10, I just wanted to bring in, this is the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the DFLP, the National Resistance Brigades. Just wanted to bring them in to show you. They are using here these TC6 mines. They're not anti-tank mines. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 used these on October 7th for vehicles. They put them in place of like Jeeps, and they use them at intersections. And you can see him screwing on the top there. That's the pressure plate that he's screwing on at the top. So these are they don't require an external pressure plate. So the DFLP is setting this up. The Martyr Omar Al-Qassam Brigade is also their name, the National Resistance Brigades. And you can see them moving in, put it into position. They don't have camera on the operation, but you can see here that it looks like they're packing it up right on the edge where the Israelis would bulldoze. And so the bulldozer would hit that. And it's not a single mine. You can see how they've stacked them together. So just a chance to get the DFLP operations in there. They're in here every week carrying out mortar operations. So they're on the battlefield still. All the groups are still on the battlefield. This next one, this is an operation that came from Shujaiya that was released while we were away. This is an operation from July the 7th. This is Saraya al-Quds and the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 brigades in a joint operation. This commander here says we prepared a complex ambush between 𝐓𝐴 𝐷 and the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 brigades in the area with pre-planted explosive devices. After detonating these explosives, the remaining vehicles that come to the reinforcements, you can see him doing marking it on the paper where the reinforcements will come from, and Qassam and Soraya both predict the route that the reinforcements will come very well, and that's why these operations work, because there's multiple layers that go into these operations. They're not just randomly placed. And the interesting thing about this operation is that it's a joint operation. You can see the fighter there moving with the EFPs. They plant one Shawad, which is Qassam's explosively formed penetrator, and they also plant one Taqib, which is 𝐓𝐴 𝐷's explosively formed projectile. And you can see them burying it here with their pressure plates. And this fighter says, there's warplanes above us, there's soldiers in front of us in their tanks, and we have overcome all this with the help of God, and we are now preparing a second explosive device in this pure sand of Gaza. So there's, and if you can always find these videos on my Twitter feed. My Twitter feed is just an archive of these videos, but you can hear the drones. You can hear the drones flying over, and here they're indicating where the tank is driving. You can see it there. It hits and knocks the camera out of the cameraman's hands. So clearly a good explosive device. And they're going to hit another one. And here you see the fighter loading up the Tandem 85. This is Soraya al-Quds' primary anti-tank weapon. And he's going to head out and hit the tank on the reinforcement path that they predicted. And there he is, just as was predicted. So a well-organized operation in Shujaiya. During the destruction of Shujaiya, the resistance is continuous in all of these areas. And here the fighters climbing through the window, returning to their base safely. Again, interesting to note the way that they're traveling outside with the blankets. We can look at number 12. They travel outside with the blankets like that so that their form doesn't get picked up by AI. We've seen them use a bunch of different ways to cover themselves. But so now we're going to focus on the Beit Hanoun battalion and the Beit Hanoun ambush. This was on July 7th. It took place. Beit Hanoun, you see it in the upper right there of the map. And you see the Erez checkpoint, the exit from Gaza that has been closed for effectively closed to Palestinians for 20 plus years. So it's a very symbolic target. It was a target on October 7th, very symbolically. And the Beit Hanoun battalion, who have been told that they have been beaten, they were told they were beaten in November 2023. And we know that they have come with many operations, which we can see in this next clip here. They put a little sizzle reel together of their operations, number 13 here. And you'll recognize some of them. I had to pull out a couple of the sniper hits, but that was the two kills with one shot. These were the massive IEDs during the general's plan that flipped the tank, that tossed the turret off the Merkava tank and separated it. There you see the destroyed vehicles. And this was the ambush that started during when Israel went back to war. And this was the tunnel-borne ambush that hit them in the buffer zone when Israel was not expecting it, and flipped over that Jeep. Could have been a captured soldier in that situation, but the fighters returned to their base safely. You can see coming up here the turret toss, the medevac helicopters not being targeted, all of the destroyed gear. So the Beit Hanoun battalion is announcing its presence here with these operations. And on this reel, they have Hussein Fayyad Abu Hamza, the Beit Hanoun battalion commander. They have his quote on there that he said when he emerged after Israel said that they killed him, and he emerged in the ceasefire alive and walking around with no entourage, walking around his community and meeting people who came home during the January ceasefire. So that was a potent little introduction to this operation that was, according to Israel's numbers, there was more than 20 casualties in this this Beit Hanoun ambush. So let's take a look at that. That's number 14. So you're going to see it's targeting the Netzah Yehuda battalion. They are the ultra-Orthodox battalion, and they have been targeted previously. This operation was the 7th of July, the same day as that operation in 𝐄𝐥𝐿𝐜 that I just showed you. There's the Netzah Yehuda battalion. They have been hit many times. They were the victims of the double sniper hit. They were the victims of the hit early on when the soldier went feet to the sky through the tank hatch. This is showing where the bombs are planted and where the Erez crossing is. So we're talking right in the buffer zone area underneath. That's an Israeli watch post up there. They have multiple positions along here. So these are under the nose of the Israelis. You're going to see them, the Israeli soldiers here, just doing everything wrong. That was just them spraying ammunition randomly. And it happened that there was a camera beside it. So there's random spray. And look at them all bunched up here, which is not how you should be moving through a battle space. They had just arrived into Gaza 1 hour before. So they're on foot. They had just arrived. They're all bunched up here. And they're about to get hit by a television IED, which is essentially a massive claymore mine that 𝐓𝐡𝐞 built, 𝐓𝐡𝐞 weapon. You can see it here. It detonates. They use the topography of the land. Presumably they use tunnels as well, but they use the topography of the land. And then here is the footage that we saw right away on July 7th. This is the footage from a thermal camera from the IDF that shows the total chaos. And the IDF has no idea what's going on in this operation. In their field report investigation, they said that there was 10 𝐓𝐡𝐞 fighters shooting at them. There was no 𝐓𝐡𝐞 fighters shooting at them. They're both IEDs planted on the route, detonated at the right moment. They were planted 12 hours before this foot patrol came in. For 4 days before that, the military bombs, destroys, airstrikes the area and destroys everything. And they think that there's no fighters in the area. So once that's completed, the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 fighters move forward, plant the explosives, and the Netzah Yehuda battalion, who just show up on the Gaza border, they walk on foot into this, and they walk into a double strike that hits the reinforcements that go to the area. And this is just remarkable because they tie in there's the second blast, and they'll tie in here the footage from the Israeli thermal camera, which is behind the hill that we can't see. Apparently, according to the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 commander, there was a third. See, there it is. There's the thermal camera, and that is behind the hill. So they're actually, the way that the videographer, or the way that they've put this video together, actually shows you through the hill that you can't see by, but that's what's going on through that hill. So again, the media ops wing of 𝐓𝐡𝐞 doing yeoman's work throughout this war to show us this story. And it's remarkable just how this whole incident took 90 minutes. The Israelis had no idea. They talked about, and then in that last scene, it says not over yet. So that is the Beit Hanoun battalion saying, after killing and wounding 20 Israeli soldiers, that the battle in Beit Hanoun is not over yet. So that is a remarkable operation. Significant number of casualties on the Israeli side, and they pointed that out. It was one of the largest single events for casualties throughout the war. 5 killed and 14 seriously or moderately wounded in that operation. And just finally, we have here a 𝐓𝐡𝐞 poster released the other day that says, "Gaza, the last fortress, stands tall with its people. You'll sooner reach the stars than see Gaza surrender." So that is the resistance report for day 699 of Israel's genocidal war on children, basically, as Nora pointed out earlier in the show.